Hi, everybody. Good day. Welcome to today's Cathedra webinar. We are coming to you live on February 6th, 2025. Today, you are tuning into 10 ways to improve relationships with grantors, and this will be presented by Diane Leonard. My name is Brooke Warrington. I'm the Training and Development Specialist here at the Native Learning Center. We're also happy you could be on for today's webinar. If you could follow along while I read the disclaimer aloud. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Just a friendly reminder, we also have our copyright infringement law printed here. So the webinar materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. You are able to access a copy of today's presentation slides. They're available for download in the courses section. And I also am going to copy and paste a link to access the slides for you in the chat box right now. Diane has also included a resource today for a grant maker relationship guide. So a link to download that is included as well. If this is your first time on, know that now that you have registered and you are on the platform, you will have access to all of our webinars moving forward. So any future webinars that you want to tune into, if you join during the time that it's happening, you'll see a green banner at the top of the screen and you'll be able to join just like you did today. But you won't need to re-register for any future webinars now that you're on the platform. You are here and you'll have access to everything moving forward, as well as our past catalog. When you join for the webinars, we do ask that you select listen only just so we can avoid any audio feedback. But if you do join with your mic enabled, that's fine too. You can always just mute yourself. If you find that the audio is coming out of a different speaker than you would prefer, you can change that by clicking on the little phone icon that's down at the bottom of your screen. And that'll bring up a list of your mic devices as well as your speaker devices. And so you can select the one you want for output. Just a couple things that are on the screen for you to use. There's a raise your hand feature down in the bottom right corner. Maybe you asked a question in the chat and you feel like we missed it. If you did join with your mic on and you want to mute yourself, the little microphone icon is down in the center. There is a shared notes section where I'm also putting all the links for today's presentation, and they have already been posted to that public chat. So if you want to ask any questions, you have any comments, Diane is very interactive, so she'll be asking you all questions throughout. You can always respond within that chat box. You'll just type in what you want to say and then click on that little paper airplane icon to send it in so everyone can see. Before I hand it over to Diane, if everybody could try out that chat box together, just take a moment and let us know your name, where you're joining us from, your work, your role in Indian country, and your tribal affiliation, please. And while y'all are getting the chat box going, Diane, I'm going to make you presenter and I will hand it off to you now. Oops.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Brooke. And welcome, everyone. It is great to see you, to have you here to talk about my favorite things. Brooke can attest, all things grants. And so very excited that you're here with me today so that we can talk about specifically relationships within grant seeking and how that is that it can help enhance your revenue. That's what we're here to really talk about, how to use relationships to increase your grant revenue. Now, Brooke was right. I do love to utilize the chat box. It is not required, but always welcome. And if you could please make sure that you are joining us in listen only mode. At the end, when I ask Q&A, always happy to have you unmute so we can talk about some of the nuances of your questions, but we'll be utilizing the chat box primarily for our interactions during the main portion of our content today. Now on the screen is a quick bio about me. Some of the folks that have joined us today, I recognize your names, and so hi, good to see you again. But folks that haven't been in my session before, just a teeny tiny bit about me and why I love talking about grants. I have spent my entire professional career in the grant space. First, I was a grant maker, so I was the program officer for the Michigan Women's Foundation, leading our grant making programs. So working on it as a staff member with our committees and our board members in order to make grants throughout the state of Michigan. But I've been on the grant seeking side for literally, just had my anniversary last week, been in business for 20 years. My, how time flies when you're having fun with grants. And so I've been on both sides, the grant making and the grant seeking. But this isn't just for me a training, teaching topic. This is what my team and I are doing literally every day. We are in it with you. I literally had to put down a letter of inquiry that I was working on with a colleague in order to be ready for the session. So this is not theory, this is practical. Now, the one thing that to me is most important on this bio slide, especially right now, just there's a lot of change happening in grants as a whole. And so for me, talking about what we do to rejuvenate ourselves, ensure we can try to minimize burnout, avoid it if we can, and be ready to focus on grants. It is about movement. It was way too cold and snowy in far, far upstate New York today for me to run outside. It was not safe. So it was indoor cycling today to check the movement box. But I did get that one great, freshly ground brewed cup of coffee that I want every morning. So the two things that help fuel my grant work are good to go. If you are willing to share with us in the chat box what it is that's fueling your work today, maybe it's being inspired by something happening in your organization or in your community, or maybe it was a great walk with the dog, whatever it is that is fueling your work. If you're willing to share, would love to hear. Now, as we look at our topic for today is all about relationships. Brooke and the Native Learning Center team and I, we plan our topics really far in advance. And sometimes, well, things work out really well for a reason. The reason I say that, we're going to talk about stewardship and relationships today. And the reason I'm so excited that that is today's topic. Actually, there's two reasons. One, it's a nice reminder outside of the month of November when most people are thinking about gratitude and stewardship and saying thank you to donors and grant makers. You could use things like Valentine's Day coming up next week as another reminder to put it on your calendar. This is important. So you've got something right happening on the calendar that could be a motivator to prioritize it on your calendar. But the second reason I'm so excited we're talking about relationships today, as I mentioned, I've been in business for now 20 years. That means I've seen lots of changes in administration. And so what that means is that I've seen that with every new administration, there are always, without fail, some changes made in grants. That is no different than this particular January and, well, now February. Every time there is a change in administration, there will be some form of changes that are made in grants. When that happens, some people happy, some people not happy. It could be for any variety of reasons, but you know what is going to happen? It means that the other types of grants are going to become really competitive in the short term. Folks are thinking about what does it mean to diversify their funding? And so you need to think about how you use relationships to stand out in the crowd, how to make your applications more competitive, regardless of what type of grant you are thinking about in the next month, the next 2 months, the next quarter. Change is inevitable. That is the one thing that I feel is absolutely a guarantee in the world of grants. The best practice of relationship building, that, I would argue, is your ticket to success, regardless of changes that may come and go. Well, I see we've got some other fuel being mentioned in the chat. Coffee also for Morgan, that's great. Helping to bring funding in and progress for the tribe you work for is your motivator. Love it. Absolutely. The impact that we as grant writers, grant professionals, whether full-time or part-time, make in individual communities, regions, the country, and the world, absolutely amazing. So I'm so thrilled that you brought that forward as fuel for your work today. Thank you so much, Morgan. As we think about relationships and what that means, I'm going to use the word stewardship some today. And that does sound more like fundraisers. But I think it's good for us to have a few different words and phrases that are going to be synonyms for how we can think about relationships, because it depends on who you're talking to in your organization or who you might be asking for help with connections or relationship building. It's nice for us to have a larger vocabulary so that maybe the way we're describing this outreach feels more accessible and more comfortable for others in our organization. What I'd love to hear as we look at the life cycle that's on your screen, you may have seen this in other presentations that I've given with the Native Learning Center. The grant life cycle is our 5 key best practices, and they're in a circular order that is the common order that you're think about them. And relationships is down at about that 5 o'clock position, as if it was a clock on the wall. It's the 3rd item in our grant life cycle if we started at that 12 o'clock noon position of readiness. It is so important, but is probably the most overlooked best practice out of the 5 that you see on the screen right now. Now, we're all friends, right? Or at least colleagues that are going to give each other a little bit of grace as we're learning about how to increase our effectiveness of relationship building with grant makers today. That's my hope. What I would ask of you in the chat box, could you please let me know on a scale of 1 to 10, 1, not comfortable, 10, incredibly comfortable. Could you please let me know on that scale of 1 to 10 how comfortable you are with grantmaker relationships? Scale of 1 to 10. No judgment on your answer at all, but if you could please let me know what your comfort level is with grantmaker relationships, the act of building them, the act of maintaining them. I'd love to hear so that I have a sense of where folks are. I'll be honest, when I became a grant maker many, many years ago, I was engaged and involved in the process because I was really excited about how to facilitate community collaborations and help to create community impact. But I'd not given enough consideration to what it was like and what the expectation would be to be on the other half of that equation, to be on the side where people were trying to build relationships. I didn't understand enough, and I was part of the process. I did not understand when I sat down at my desk that day, the reality that on some level, literally every grant is relationship based. I might say, Diane, no, I'm filling out a form and I'm scored and I'm writing pages of narrative and I'm scored. It's not about relationships for how I get the award. I won't argue that. You're right. There are times where who gets awarded is truly very straightforward based on how were you read, how were you scored, where did you place. I love those types of competition because the rules are really clear. Love it. But even when that's the type of situation for how you get the award, there is so much to be learned before you write and submit this scored application that's based on how we talk to program managers, how we talk to elected officials, how we talk to collaborative partners. Those are all relationships that influence our application and its competitiveness. That's all pre-award. And then on the backside, once you get the award, yes, after you do all the celebration and happy dances that go with it, the grant management and the reporting, that's a whole new set of relationships related to your success. The relationships that you have with program managers, with program officers, with program directors, the people who are in charge of the program that you have received funding for, whether they're worried about the programmatic piece or they're worried about the evaluation for all grantees or they're worried about the reimbursement and the checks for all of the grantees. All of those individuals that you're interacting with in person or at conferences, over email, over phone, those are all relationships that help in the big picture. So you have shared with me in the chat box your comfort level with relationships. Maybe that broad scale 1 to 10. I have a follow-up question, and whether you typed your comfort level into the chat box or not, I would ask that you consider answering this question. Are you more comfortable with relationships pre-award, so prior to submitting applications, or are you more comfortable with relationships post-award. So after receiving notification of award and knowing you're going to do the good work, they're going to give you the money. So could you please type into the chat box either pre-award or post-award? Again, no judgment, just trying to get a sense of where people might feel comfortable. There are individuals who are like, oh, I love talking to people about the potential of our work. I get so excited. Those are folks who often also love talking to community members and donors at special events or community collaborative gatherings. Folks that feel more comfortable on the post-award side might love thinking about the revenue that's coming in and carefully tracking outputs and outcomes and the dollars that are coming in, making sure you don't leave any dollar unspent. It might be that they feel comfortable because it doesn't feel salary. It doesn't feel like you're trying to ask or convince someone to fund you. That hard work has already happened. So it feels like maybe there's a little less pressure. So there's reasons why different grant writers or grant professionals will feel more comfortable one side, pre-award versus post-award. Not a right or wrong, absolutely not, and no judgment for which one you said or thought. But I think it's important to recognize where you feel more comfortable, where it feels stronger for you. And I'd ask you to consider, as we go through the tips today, to think about what you might do to strengthen the side that doesn't feel strongest for you. Maybe think of one thing that you could try in the upcoming month that would help strengthen the side you didn't say or you didn't think. I'd also encourage you to think about within your organization who might be able to help you, who might feel comfortable on that other side. If you typed post, who on your team or in your organization might feel better on that pre-award side? It's actually a wonderful approach to have at least two individuals helping to build relationships with a single grant maker. You know why? I'm wondering, and this is a rhetorical question, so no need to type an answer in the chat box. I'm wondering if any of you ever like to take time off from work. I hear the resounding yes. Good. Well, your vacations, maybe short, maybe really long extended vacations, maybe even you get a sabbatical. Or maybe you're sick for a short period of time. Or maybe you need to take a leave for a little bit. Funder relationships don't stop. So the idea of having two people in the organization gives you some redundancy in terms of the strength of the relationship, so that if good, bad, middle of the road reasons why someone in the organization isn't always available, you can still move the relationship forward in service of achieving your mission. All right, so hopefully I have made the case that literally all grants, everything from foundation to city, state, and federal, in at least one way are going to be relationship-based in the entire grant life cycle. So then if we acknowledge and accept that idea that relationships are going to be key for us, at least once within the entire life cycle for one particular grant maker, now we have to think about how we document it. How do we prioritize it? I don't know about you, but for me, if it's on my calendar, whatever it is, that is what I think to do first. That is what I prioritize in my day first. If I didn't put my morning workout on my calendar, I know me. I would probably still do it, but that accountability of it being there does make it so that visible priority influences my actions. If I set aside deep work time to build a slide deck like today's, I am less likely to do something else during that time because I have made the commitment. Not a perfect plan, but if you and your organization put relationship outreach on your calendar, I call it your grant calendar, it could be your team calendar, it could be organizational calendar, putting relationship outreach, whatever it is that you need to do with whomever, in what way you decide is meaningful, putting those things on the calendar that action alone is going to increase the chance that your organization will do it. I like that. It's a nice little boost that you will take these actions at a minimum to think about stewardship for your grant applications. Now, is it a phone call? It could be. And I mean, this looks like such an old school phone with a cord. It reminds me of being a child and carrying the phone as far as I could away from where it was on the wall so I could have a private conversation without my siblings. You could be thinking about your cell phone. That's fine too. It could be that you're thinking about emails or attending an event where you know a funder will be. Use the phone because it's a cute red phone. Any relationship outreach mechanism that you would like to do should be on your calendars. So why do we do this? Why do we focus on relationships? Because our grant makers, they don't want to be treated like they are a transaction. No. Even though there is obviously an increased use of artificial intelligence in all sorts of ways that we're working, right? I'm like, it pops up now in my email and it pops up on my browser. It's in a lot of stuff. But it is still people reading our applications, giving us the score, making a decision about our application versus another. Let's not treat those awesome individuals as a basic transaction. So there's a few high-level things I'd ask you to consider. I really don't want you treating your grant maker like an ATM. I really want you to think about what it means for you, for your organization. You could each have a different definition, but I want each of you to have a way that you decide to steward your grant maker relationships. How do you enhance them? How do you maintain them? And then I want you to think about whether you like surprises in your personal life or not. I don't like surprise parties. My spouse knows that. My children know that. I don't want surprise parties. Now, occasionally, sure, there can be such things as a good surprise. Oh, you brought me a fresh coffee decaf from my favorite local coffee shop. That's the sort of surprise I like. We don't ever want to surprise our grant maker in a grant report. Never, ever. If you can remember these 3 high-level things, I'm going to talk about some tactical tips, 10 in fact, per the name of today's webinar. If you can keep these 3 things in mind, though, you'll be in great shape. So as we're thinking about these as our high level, our umbrella that goes over all different types of grant makers that we would want to build relationships with, I would like for you to think first of an ATM. I drove through my bank today. Actually, I went through the teller line, not the ATM line. But why do we go to the ATM? Anyone want to tell me in the chat box, why do you go to the ATM? It could be that you need to deposit a check. It could be that you want to balance or check your balance. But it's very likely that you would go to an ATM, whether you walked up to it or you drove up to it. It would be likely that it is because you want actual cash. Venmo's not going to do it. Bill pay online isn't going to do it. You need cash. Well, sure. That's a transaction. The other 2 types of interactions at that ATM, the deposit, checking balance, also transactions. Don't make your grant maker feel like the only reason they hear from you is that it's time for another grant award. It is time for more money. They don't want to only hear from you when it's time. I know that you don't want to have them feel like your hands are out. I only come to you when I need money. But well-intentioned organizations do that to grant makers, unfortunately, frequently. Don't let that be you. So don't treat your grant makers like an ATM. Well, if we're going to embrace that idea, then we probably want to think about that stewardship. What would be ways or reasons that we might interact over the course of a grant award, whether it's 6 months or a year or 3 years? How would we interact? We want to think about what it means to say thank you, what it means to express next level gratitude, what it means to treat our grantmaker like a funding partner. Some of the tips today are going to be about very specific ways that we could conduct in the way our organization is comfortable with stewardship, expressing next level gratitude. And then that third item that I asked you to consider, these big picture ideas that are going to be overarching for all of our tips today. We don't want to surprise a grant maker in a report. How many of you have had your grants go exactly the way that you planned them, on exactly the timeline you proposed, for exactly the dollar amount in each category that you laid out? How many of you have had that happen for all of the grants you have been involved with? Do let me know in the chat box why for yes and for no. How many of you have had your grants that you have been working on, that you've written, that you helped to implement, go exactly as planned? I'll take a look. I'll watch in the chat box to see what's happening. I'm not seeing anyone rushing to the chat box. You might say, Diane, that sounds like you're being very sarcastic. I might be. But if you had done 1 or 2 grants, it could be that you say yes. But the more grants that you secure, the more grants that your organization implements, the more likely it is that, oh, Morgan, thanks for your candid response, that that's not true. And it doesn't mean your organization's doing anything wrong. What it means is that your plans were your best laid plans. But then some, usually pretty long period of time, went by, then you got the grant award, and then in implementation, things change. It could be that staff changed. It could be that, like today, far upstate New York, it could be that your after-school program had fewer meetings over the course of the month than you thought because there were so many snow days and early school releases. What happens? Life happens. So how you respond to change over following the plan, the grant application being the plan, is what's important here. The minute that you realize that things aren't going as planned, even if it's actually a really positive thing that's different, not just when things don't go in a, oh, things aren't going as planned, it's not just a negative feeling, good or bad, when things aren't going as planned, you've got to talk to the funder. You don't want them to open a report on their email or something that you've mailed them and be like, oh, did you know? And the colleague's like, no, I had no idea. You don't ever want them to feel that sense of surprise. This is the bad kind of surprise. For me, it's like a surprise party, not the kind I like. You want them to be surprised in the good way. Oh, you brought me my favorite coffee from my local coffee shop. Thanks so much for telling us that things are going differently, but really well than planned. Hey, thanks so much for reaching out to give a heads up that your output numbers are going to be a little bit different in the short term because of all these extra snow days. Really appreciate you. Grant makers are positively surprised if you're very proactive about talking to them about how things are going and what you're learning. And Morgan, I love that you're using the word pivot. It was certainly overused during the pandemic, and the Ross meme from Friends about the couch and pivot, it's one of my favorites. But honestly, I don't think you can overwork that muscle. I think embracing that and realizing that there is always change. Change is inevitable. And it's out of your control. What is in your control is how do you respond to it as a team in a thoughtful way and not surprise the grant makers. I'm fine with things being different than planned. What I want is the grant makers to not be surprised. And so if you keep these 3 things in mind, you are really setting the stage for some stronger, enhanced, improved relationships with your grant makers. Now, I'm using grant makers very broadly in the way I describe it today. For that way, it covers whether you're thinking about foundation, so like private, corporate, family, community foundations, United Ways, up through city, county, state, and federal funding. Anyone that is making grants would be appropriate for you to think about these tips we're going to talk about today. Now, before we get into our 10 tips, I do want to highlight that in your course materials within the learning system, you can download our Grantmaker Relationship Guide. If you click to it now, I don't want you to get booted from the class, but so you can go get it later. The PDF is there for you. And within it, you're going to see some of the templates that I'll bring up on the screen here. So when that does happen, I'll call it out as well, but I wanted to give you that heads up in advance. So our 10 tips, they are not in priority order. They're not Dave Letterman style in terms of our late night TV show top 10 list. They are all great tips that could be the right tip for you. The reason I say that is that each of you in your organizations are in a different place in terms of comfort level or where you are in a particular grant application process or an implementation process. There might be different types of stewardship you have in place with the community that might make one funder idea better or easier than another. So I want you listening for which tip of the 10 is going to be most likely that you want to try first. If you want to try all 10, absolutely, I'm in for it. But that's a lot to take on. You have a lot of other things going on. You probably have a list of grant deadlines that you're worried about. So when we get to the end of our time together today, what I'm going to ask you is which tip, and you're going to be able to either paraphrase it by word or give me the number if you remember it, but I'm going to ask you which one you want to focus on or try something with first. Don't overwhelm yourself and take on lots and lots. They'll all be there in the queue. Once you have used one and tried it with at least one funder, well, then you can come grab another one. But the goal today is for you to find one that you want to try. With that context, number one, express sincere gratitude beyond the formal and required payment acknowledgement letter, and do so at unexpected times. All right, let's break that down together. So when you receive payment or when you receive a grant award, depends on the type of grant maker for what is going to happen next. You might have to sign a grant contract. You might have to sign a grant award letter. It could be, if it's a foundation, they're going to expect that they receive an acknowledgement letter that you've received their grant check, that there were no goods or services provided in exchange for this grant award, because they need that for their tax records that they're going to give to their CPA to do their 990 form for the IRS. So you have to do these things. Have to do things sound awfully transactional, don't they? Obligatory. That's not stewardship. So how do we take it to the next level? Do what is required and then think about what can I do beyond that to express gratitude or to say thank you in other ways. I would love it if you could share with me in the chat box any examples of things you have done in your organization, or maybe in a previous job, if that's true for you, of expressing gratitude to a grant maker. Different ways that you may have said thank you. It might not be that you verbally said thank you, but a way that you expressed gratitude. If you have any examples, I would love to see them in the chat box. So when you think about what you have done in the past, all the different ways, I think there could be at least one different way for as many people are with us today. That would be amazing to hear that many different examples. Let me get you started with some of the maybe easier things that you might not be counting as gratitude or expressions of thanks yet. but I hope that you will in the future. How many of you in your organization are producing a newsletter, hard copy or electronic? Could you let me know in the chat box why for yes and for no? Producing some sort of update for the community or for your donors. It could be a multi-page PDF. It could be a single body of an email structure. But anything that you are producing like that gives you the potential to think about how you could recognize your grant maker. It could be their name underneath the bottom of a photo you include in the newsletter or in the electronic communication. It could be that, explain what the photo is, supported in part by, and state the grant maker's name. Morgan's sharing that they're acknowledging grant makers in local newspaper articles, in their newsletter, and on the website. Yes, I'm going to get the dingy bell for that. This is the way I like to celebrate things online. Yes, love it. All fantastic. They look passive. They're not easy because they take time to coordinate and ensure that they're done and ensure that they're accurate. But they've got a lot of reach. And all of those things that Morgan just shared, the newspaper articles, the newsletter you create and control, your website itself, whether it's your homepage or a separate program or project page off to the side, those are all things that you can share. PDF, upload with a report, append to the PDF, drop in as an image in the body of an email. Those are all things that you can share with the grant maker so that even if they didn't see it in the moment, you can say, I want to make sure that you saw the way that we helped to promote and share with our community our funding partnership. Now they know that you're thinking about them outside of the times when it's ready to ask them for more money. You can also, when we think about how we're saying thank you to our grant makers, we can think about giving them access to see their funding in action. How many of you have ever in your organization invited a grant maker to an open house or a multi-group site visit, or maybe an individual site visit? Could be in person or virtual. Could you let me know in the chat box why for yes and for no? How many of you have ever hosted or organized or invited a site visit or an open house? During the pandemic, lots of organizations had to get really creative with how they were going to invite funders to see their work when their work was looking different and their access to funders was looking different. And I think that that was a fantastic way, right? There's plans and then there's change. We've got to think about how we react to the change versus following the plan. That idea that we can be creative, that we can give video access, that, geez, that might help us actually. We're in far, far upstate New York. That funder in California isn't going to make the trip. How can we still help them be part of our work, understand our work? So getting creative. It doesn't have to be a lot of fancy snacks laid out and lots of name tags and right. We have to polish everything before the funder or funders walk in. It doesn't have to be that, which is what I think some organizations worry about and stress about, which is why they don't always feel comfortable holding these events. I also don't think you need to do it for a singular funder. Doing it so that it is group access, sort of like, an open house party. My daughter recently graduated from high school. So in my mind, I'm thinking about like the open house style, sent invitations to our family and friends. And we're going to say, anybody can come in, have cake and some snacks. And we said, we're here and ready to have you help her celebrate. And we gave a period of time. Do the same thing. That way you can invite maybe it's your donors and your community members and your funders. Think about how you can make it as impactful as possible. Don't worry, unless the funder has asked for a one-on-one site visit or a one-on-one visit of the program, I would not worry about making it a singular event for them. When we think about the different ways to engage our grant makers, we looked at newsletters, how we could acknowledge on websites, how we could help them see our work in action. I gave that example of a virtual site visit. I'm here in far, far upstate New York. The funder in California, they're not coming up here, not just for a site visit. I mean, they might love the area, but it's a lot of travel and it's the cost. There's some barriers. Well, so this story actually is like that. This is a grant maker who occasionally was in the area, right here in my backyard. So we're in the Thousand Islands, far, far upstate New York, very rural. And the funder who was supporting this organization, Save the River, they're the local river keeper for the St. Lawrence River. This organization had been receiving support from this particular foundation for a number of years. But the stakeholders for the foundation were not local. They never could see the impact of their funding. Literally supporting over 1,000 students a year, learning about how to be good stewards of the St. Lawrence River. Couldn't see it. They didn't get to go on the field trip, which some of the local funders did, to be on the boat. Yes, the big pontoon cruise boat that took these small children, actually all the way up through high school, but this is pictured in the top left with the small children with their orange life vests, sort of like kept their neck tucked in. They didn't get to see that and how excited the kids were, as for some of them, it was the first time that they actually went on the water versus seeing the water, maybe as they drove by. They didn't get to see that. And so what the organization did, small and mighty, 4 staff, not 4 full-time staff, but 4 staff. They took all these photos from their different programs and they made some posts. They did a blog post saying thank you. They then took that same post and they put it out on Twitter, now X. They also put it on Instagram and Facebook. And so what did they do? What is it that they created? It wasn't that they were able to bring the funder to the boat, have them experience it firsthand, but they were able to express gratitude about the funding partnership so that others in the organization's sphere and community could see what was happening and see the impact that was being created. They had all sorts of collateral that they could share a link to, create a PDF of, email to the funder when it was available. Because, oh, by the way, the funder wasn't really active on social media anywhere, so they weren't going to see it native in their feed. And this way they were able to say to the funder, look at what's happened. Look at these smiling faces. Look at the impact you created. But it was within the capacity of what those 4 staff could do. So be creative. As we think about that story, the in-person open houses, they're all different ways of saying thank you. What other ways can you say thank you? I'm curious, when was the last time that, and think back for a moment, when was the last time that you received a handwritten note professionally that had been mailed to you? I'm going to take the personal stuff out of it because you might get different cards, different times of years, the holidays, anniversaries, or birthdays. So we're not thinking on the personal side. I want you to think on the professional side. When was the last time that you received something professionally that was handwritten? You can think of a time. I would absolutely love for you to give a rough time approximation for how long ago it was in the chat box. I'm thinking back, and I think the last time that I received something that was handwritten was, I think it was in September of 2024. September, October, November, December, January, yep, well, 5 months. And I can remember, it took me a minute to think about the date, but I can remember which Grant Professionals Association chapter it is. that hand wrote the note and sent it to me. That's pretty good. I mean, like for my working memory, that's pretty good to have that much. I'm like, oh yeah, I remember if they did it. That stuck out. Filed it away. Not just for today, but right, like that was pretty cool. I remembered it. If you, your executive director, a program recipient or beneficiary, a community member, if someone takes the time to write, and I'm not talking a big note, little note card to a grant maker and mails it to them, those are the sort of things that end up tacked on walls because it is so infrequent that they receive them. They get circulated around offices, or if it's a distributed team, they will get somebody will take a picture or scan it and circulate it because it is so unusual. Now, frankly, my penmanship is awful, absolutely awful, no doubt about it. But that's okay. I can really practice and go slow and think about actually dotting my I, completing all the letters. Should have, I don't know what, I guess that's why I'm a writer as a typer instead of as a hand writer. But it's the act of writing out the thank yous, sending it, the time and the thought that it takes. That's what's going to stick with them, not judging your penmanship. At least that's what I tell myself. Now, if you want to dial it up just a little bit, turn up the volume on the amp, and think about expressions of gratitude. Depending on the types of projects or programs that you're operating, you might get to do something a little fancier. That would be something you would mail. On the left-hand side is a thank you card that was generated by an art therapy program and an Alzheimer's adult day program. So the art therapist helped to make the cards, and so they were the residents' and participants' fingers. Then you can write the nice note inside. On the right-hand side, and I get it, so they're fingerprints. So do this with permission. But these were children in a preschool program, and this is the art that they made. Very personal. This isn't just tacked on the wall. This might sit in a prominent place within the office, because this is definitely next level. But if it feels comfortable for your program, if you've got some ideas on what you could do, what would be allowable, if it's aligned with maybe what the program is doing, absolutely. Fantastic. All right, so that's tip one, expressing gratitude and realizing how wide of a definition that is and how many different opportunities there are after you sign the award letter, sign the contract, or send your acknowledgement letter. Countless opportunities. Now, you have to take them all. You want to do at least one during the course of the grant award period so that it is not transactional, so that the grant maker has heard from you before you go to ask for more money or to talk about your renewal. Tip number two, reach out to request advice when appropriate and outside of asking for feedback on your next anticipated request. The reason I had to add that final phrase is because you're right. It's a good practice to try to talk to a grant maker before you apply. And so what you're doing is asking their advice. Do they think that it would be more competitive with your decision makers if you applied for A or for B? Would it be better if you asked for $25,000 or $30,000? Yes, that is asking for advice. But if you only ask for that type of advice, it's going to fall in the transactional category because you're ready for more money. So what sort of advice might be appropriate? You could express to the funder that you are looking to diversify some of your revenue and you're interested in talking to Foundation ABC because you think that they might be a great partner for your program. And wondering if the foundation, you think that they know each other, would they be willing to make an introduction? Do they think that that might be a funder who also would be a good fit? I mean, that takes some courage to ask, but it's appropriate to ask, and that is you asking for advice. Do they think it would be appropriate to reach out to them? It could be that things haven't gone quite as planned. The program design that you laid out good plans, but then things happened. And so you're asking the funder maybe if they've seen other grantees have to adjust their design because of similar factors. And what have they learned? And is there anything that they've learned that could help you? Maybe you're, like I said before, I'm in a very rural community, so maybe you're experiencing a twist on the transportation barrier that is so common in rural communities. And it's not one you had seen before, and it's a little different than expected. And so maybe you're wondering if other rural grantees have tried to solve this impediment in a different way. So you can ask the grant maker, what have they seen? What are they willing to share with you? You could also be asking for advice, right? That idea about that you're seeing a barrier, that's something a little bit different, you're in the middle of implementation. It doesn't have to be that you're asking for information about other grantees. Sometimes it's a nice way to frame it. It might feel more comfortable. But it could be that you're asking advice about the particular implementation piece or the budgetary change. Here's what we're thinking. We're really surprised by the vendor quotes we're getting for these supplies are far beyond what we budgeted. We're not quite sure what to do. I'm wondering if you have any suggestions, dear grant maker, for other sources we might look to. You know, all sorts of supply chain issues, grocery store prices, right? There could be all sorts of reasons why you might have budget things going differently than planned. And so asking the grant maker what they've experienced, what they might be able to offer you as connections or resources or ideas, you're treating them like a funding partner. Now this one, you might go, oh, I didn't consider that this was part of the feedback we could count in this stewardship idea. How many of you are asking for input, feedback, when you get denied for a grant? Let me put a delineator in the chat box here. There we go. Why for yes and for no? How many of you are asking for feedback after you get denied, after you get rejected? First, we're sad we didn't get the funding. But then we want to know, how did we score? What sort of feedback was given, formal or informal? Asking for feedback after we get rejected is asking for advice. They might say, but Diane, they didn't fund us. But it shows that we want to be better, we want to improve, and so that actually does count as a positive for our funder relationship development. But here's the second level to that question. This is actually, again, turning up the volume there on the amp, making this one stronger. When you get a funding award, after you celebrate, after you might give your initial, oh, wow, thanks so much response, are you asking for their feedback on your awarded proposal? This is my favorite type of advice to solicit from a grant maker. You want to let me know if any of you have done this before. Have you ever asked a grant maker of any kind for feedback on the proposal that they just funded? It might sound something like, dear grant maker, we are so excited about the new grant award. Thank you so much. We're really interested to know what from the proposal stood out. What was your board really excited about? And while we know you funded it, we just want to make sure that we understand if there were any questions or things of particular interest that you're looking to hear about in our grant report. That, chef's kiss, that is absolutely brilliant to ask the grant maker, because what you're doing, like the asking about when we got rejected, good, fine, we learn from failure, we try to improve. But there's always a bunch that's out of our control for why we might have gotten rejected. When we ask about what we did well, what did their board or the committee react to, respond to? Why did they say yes to us? Now what we're saying is, how can we replicate this success for this grant maker the next time and potentially for other grant makers? If folks are really, again, because I told you to think of one thing, This doesn't have to be over the phone. This can be over email. This is one of my favorite, very nuanced tactics to suggest for folks to add to their calendar. Because it's a, hey, we got the award. We're all super excited. We're going to do lots of like implementation things. Ask the question, right? You can have even a template about it to get you started. You're going to learn so much that will make your grant process stronger forever. Oh, I kind of answered you about which one of the 10 I might want you to consider. Okay, but there's more. Let's move to 3. So don't treat your grant makers like the ATM. Reach out and connect more often rather than only when you need to reapply for funds. We already talked about why we head to the ATM. What are some of the different times within our grant life cycle where we might reach out? So we could, during our research work, we could reach out because indeed we want to find out what's a good fit and would we be competitive? And if we're thinking about new relationships, now I know how I talked about if somebody's just funded you and then you've been implementing and you're like, oh, it's time for more money. And you go to them and that's the only time they've heard from you, that feels really transactional. That feels ATM. But if it's initial research of a grant maker that's brand new to you, maybe it's the Diane Leonard Foundation. Okay, that doesn't actually exist yet, but that's the theoretical example. Right? That foundation seems like it's perfect for us. That would be a great way to start to build a relationship, to reach out, to try and communicate about their process, to get questions answered. And you're going to find within your materials in our relationship guide some of the different talking points that you could use as guidance to do that. So when you're doing your research work, usually if the funder has a website, that's going to be our best information. But we can learn a lot through the different research tools as well. In fact, this is actually a great use, so ethical by GPA and AFP standards. This is a good use of AI. What's the best contact information for fill-in-the-blank foundation? Does the grant maker allow communication before I apply? Another great question to ask. See what it gives you. But if you could go to their website first, I would do that. So if we're on their website, we're looking about eligibility. It might then tell us that we can apply. Just take the quiz, head straight to apply. Okay, I'd like to talk to you if I could, but okay, we got a green light, head to apply. But in this example, the funder's website tells us that we value your time and don't want you to spend unnecessary hours and resources preparing a proposal unless there's a clear possibility of working together. They want you to build a relationship with them. They want to have a conversation. It might not turn into a funding relationship yet, or it might. This funder tells you that they encourage you to talk to their directors to discuss your ideas before applying. Please call us if you'd like to have a brief conversation. The door is open. This is all relationship building. I get it. You are looking at them for the first time. It's scary. It feels like cold calling sometimes. Fine, stay behind the email, stay where you're comfortable if that's your preference. But lots of funders are giving access points, access via email, access via phone. Not all, certainly not all. But when you're doing your research work, look for what are their pre-award preferences. What is their pre-award capacity? Sidebar though, please make sure that if you find a way to contact them through their website or using AI, that you have read their frequently asked questions and their main website materials, so you're not asking them questions that they have already clearly answered. Now, sometimes all we're going to find is contact information in case we have a portal issue. I wouldn't do lots of outreach to the portal email addresses, but you could email maybe once to say, if I've got a question about the priorities and how we align, is there anyone that I could talk to? That's okay. They might not answer, or they might answer with who could be a contact. But as I said, there will be times when grant makers won't want to talk to you beforehand. They want it to be transactional. Well, okay, then I'll treat it ATM style. You told us that you will not communicate beforehand, and that it's because you don't have capacity to talk to everybody and you're going to be consistent about it for everybody. All right, I respect it. Thank you for sharing. But unless the grant maker has told you, please treat us transactionally pre-award, I would encourage you to step back and think about what the grant maker outreach could look like so that it is not transactional. We want to, from the first time we do our outreach and make a first impression all the way through, when yes, we do intend to apply again, how can we make them feel engaged? Now, the other thing to remember, though, is that our grant makers, well, they're people. They're out and about, and we might run into them in a wide variety of places in our professional and personal setting. So if we're doing our homework for trying to reach out to a new grant maker, we want to be ready to use it in a wide variety of ways. And we also want to be sure that it's not just us that feels prepared. We want to make sure that our colleagues feel prepared as well. So building a relationship is best done if we feel prepared, so we're not coming up with ideas or questions on the fly. To prepare, what I encourage you to think about before you start jotting down talking points, I would encourage you to think about, what is it that you want your grant maker to remember? What is it that you want them to think about for what you do, so your strategy or your strategies that you do, and the impact, the results that you create? I'm imagining that you don't want them to remember what year your organization started operating. I'm imagining you don't want them to know what your tax status is as a tribal organization. That's not the most important thing that you want them to know. You want them to know what the impact is that you are creating. What strategy or strategies, activity or activities you do to achieve that impact. You want to have a nice, short, say 30-second little pitch about what that is. What would you want them to remember and be able to turn around and say to a colleague or to their partner when you walk away? Oh, what were they talking to you about? Oh, they were telling me how they focus on what? Minimizing food insecurity in the community by offering a hot meal program every single day. Or what's relevant to your work. But what is it that they can quickly say, even though they don't know all the nuances of the things you do, your projects and programs? What is that high level thing that you want them to remember about who you are? So if you're thinking about that idea, and maybe you even visualize, oh, I'm at a special event, I'm at a play at the local elementary school, and we stand up afterwards, and oh, I just bumped into somebody that we're going to get to talk to at the dessert bar. Oh, I ran into somebody standing in line at the local coffee shop. They're all people. So this isn't deep conversations about, well, here are the nuances of what I would like to ask for. We're having quick conversations so that we could follow up. Oh, it was so nice to chat with you. I'd love to talk a little bit more about your upcoming grant program. When we're together with them, we want to just treat them like a person who wants to know more about our work. Treat them like an individual donor. Or better yet, treat them like a loved family member or friend who's very close. You haven't seen them in a while. They're like, oh, tell me about your work. I know you just started at a new organization. Tell me about what you love about that group. You're probably going to tell them, oh, it's great. We do these things, and we're creating such change in the community. Okay, so probably not quite like that formal, but you're going to tell them the things that you do and the impact you're creating. So try that with your grant makers. Once you have made it past, we had the nice pleasantries, they remembered what we said and who we were, and therefore we're going to get to maybe chat. 3 things that I'd like you to have ready, and you'll find these in your course materials in the handout. I want you to have your introduction ready. The somewhat more formal introduction. What organization are you with? Where is it that you're doing work? Don't assume that they understand if you're the whole county or a whole community or a whole reservation. Give them an understanding of where you're doing your work. Please don't tell them, again, what year you started operating or how many different programs you're running. Don't give them lots of information right now to overwhelm them. Just a real quick bit of context if you are not 100% certain that they know where you are as an organization and where geographically you're providing service. Then you could say, as I mentioned when I saw you at the play the other day, we are providing these hot meals every day in order to reduce food insecurity in the community. And we know, we've seen that you're funding some things like school backpack programs and some emergency food pantries. And so we thought you would be a good fit because. Does that sound like it could be a good fit to you? Do you think there could be a meaningful conversation? Do you think it would be okay if I asked you a few questions about your upcoming process? I'm doing that completely off the cuff. And I'm like, so maybe I stumbled a little bit there. But I said just a few things and I paused. I let them react. Did they think it would potentially be a fit or not? So that if they say yes, oh yeah, go ahead. What questions do you have? I could ask them the questions that I have based on our research, based on the homework we did, not the things in their frequently asked questions. We're probably only going to get to have a few minutes together if this is over the phone. If it's over email, well, it shouldn't be a very lengthy email. 1-sentence introduction, 2 lines about why we think we're a fit. Is it okay? I've got these 2 or 3 questions, and you could put them right in the email. Don't wait for them to reply back to say yes, and then go, okay, let me minimize the back and forth and just ask them the questions. But these 3 items work in just about any setting. Email, phone, follow-up at a conference, follow-up the next time you see them at a local community event. Number 5, do what you say you will, when you say you will, and how you say you will. Good colleague and friend Preston Martin used to say this. He was the vice president of programs when I was on staff as a foundation grants coordinator many years ago. And this is what he used to say to his different program directors all the time, because they had lots of state and city contracts and grants. And how are you going to get paid in those situations when you're billing by 15-minute increments for adult day programs? By doing what you say you will, when you say you will, and how you say you will. We're very much focused on the reporting portion of the grant life cycle with this particular tip. So you've done all the hard work of relationship building in advance of the writing. You've spent all sorts of time making your writing the best, strongest application you can, and you got funded. So then we want to do what we say we will, when we say we will, and how we say we will. However, what did I just say before? If things are going sideways, or at least just differently, good or bad, we don't want to have our grant maker be surprised during the report. So if we're thinking about what the reports are, just working on a grant report for a client this week, and they have quarterly reports that are due. Quarterly. Whew. And it's not like fill in the output numbers. It was a 7-page narrative document. You send one and you start thinking about the next because you're constantly trying to listen for stories and what might we put in. That's their process. So it's less likely that that particular funder is going to be surprised because so little time passes from one report to the next. But even still, with someone like that, You don't want them to get the PDF in their email and be like, whoa, that was a big change since the last one, good or bad. So regardless of the frequency of the report, how can you communicate in advance of a formal report if one is required so that they're not surprised? We want our funders at all levels, foundation, government, to feel like they are funding partners. We're a fit because of how our mission and their purpose align. Number 6, in the way that is appropriate for the grant maker's preferences or desires, please promote the funding partnership or relationship. It could mean that you're sharing on social media. I shared that example from Save the River and the way that one blog post then created multiple different social media posts. It could be that you are sure to post at a minimum on the network where you know the grant maker is. If you know the grant maker is in just the Instagram space, or there's a foundation just a few, like an hour south of us, and they don't have a website, but they do have a Facebook page. They don't have Instagram, they don't have any other media, just the Facebook page. They have one staff person that's part of their job to maintain. Well, you could put it on the other spots because it might help for your donors in your community to know about it. It would give you more to put in the report. But at a minimum, say something nice and tag them so they don't miss it on the platform where they are. Say it where they are. Now, those first 2 images, they were great. There were some hashtags, there were some tags, but you didn't know a whole lot about what the funding was doing. What did it look like? Could anybody type in the chat box for me? I know you don't have to read that text. That is teeny tiny text. Pretend you're scrolling on your phone through a feed. What sort of work was supported by this grant? What do you think? What sort of work was supported by this grant that was being celebrated on social media? The other one was some sort of boating, right? We could see those pictures from the Save the River one. But this one, I'm like, oh, yeah, we're at the dentist office. Something related to dental hygiene. Or perhaps, let's see, it could be workforce development for dental hygienists. Yeah, you know what? Both, I'm still in the same field. I have a really quick idea of what the impact is that this grant is helping to support. That is better than funder logos. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some funders that will say, you have to post a picture of us presenting the check. I will not name funders that do that. There are many of them. Less than there used to be, but there are still many. And oh my goodness, and I love elected officials that can help get money, but they love to be in the pictures too. And then they love it when you help put them up on social media, or you help get it in the news. We honor and we do those things. But wouldn't it be great if we actually shared 2 pictures? One of like the funder logo or a check picture, and one of something impact related, something that shows the type of work we're doing. So yes, promote the funding partnership, but try to think about, what do people learn as a result? What would make people want to react if you're watching the metrics? What would make them click like, click love, click support on whatever platform it is that you're on? Number 7, bring some friends to the party. Now, what this technically says is bring your board and other constituents into the process by asking them to make warm introductions to contacts with grant makers. So the way I told the story about using your talking points or giving a quick summary of what you do was you doing the talking to a grant maker that you happen to run into. But it's not just on your shoulders to do that work. It could be that your colleagues, your advisory councils, some emeritus council members, staff in other programs like day-to-day staff. They have all sorts of connections, and you don't know where folks will run into each other. Asking them if they feel comfortable. Geez, team, we're looking to find a contact at that Diane Leonard Foundation. Do any of you happen to know the folks on this list? Fancy name for this questionnaire on the screen right now is the Grantmaker Relationship Questionnaire. Because what we found over the years is if we asked awesome folks like you, and if you asked your colleagues, hey, do you know anyone at the Diane Leonard Foundation? It was very likely that folks would be like, no, I don't think so. But if we said, hey, do you know anyone at the Diane Leonard Foundation? Here's the list of 10 people on staff and the 10 people that are on their board this year. Do you know any of these people? Oh, I didn't know that she was on that board. Oh, I see her at Rotary every once in a while. I could make a warm introduction. That's the sort of thing that starts to happen. And now it's not on your shoulders exclusively to try and find these folks or have conversations. You could ask for a warm introduction. Now, my favorite way to get a warm introduction to help people think about who they might be able to help with is actually LinkedIn. So on the screen is the snapshot of Lisa Lawson, the current president and CEO of the Annie E. Casey Foundation. I'm going to say, Diane, that foundation is not what I want to apply for. But here's what I want to explain to you for how you can use this idea. So if I see that, wow, I'm a second connection to Lisa, I'm unlikely to click the connect button and add that teeny tiny message. Hey, I'd love to talk to you about your funding programs. Not likely. I'm not going to get a response. But I can look at who am I connected to Lisa through. And I might go, wow, it's Kimberly from my book club. It's actually a true story. Or, wow, it's somebody that I worked with on a project 2 months ago. Oh, yeah, they were fantastic. Oh, it's my board member. Try to find out, play kind of 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. Who is it that you know? And ask, would you be willing to make a warm introduction? All of a sudden, your circle of folks that you could connect with and try out your talking points on has gotten bigger. And they might say, they might surprise you, but actually, if you give me a few things, key things that I should talk about or questions I should ask, actually, I'm happy to talk to them myself. Oh, cool. Okay, thanks. All right, I get excited about the LinkedIn thing. You'd think, anyway, I'm on LinkedIn. Yes, you can connect there. Check out who I know, see if there's any connections. Happy to help make warm introductions. All right, tip number 8. Promote the other work supported by your grant makers. If your work is aligned, your network will also be interested in the other great things your grant maker is supporting. There's a reason that you think you're a good fit with this potential grant maker. Or if you are currently their grantee, there are definitely reasons that they funded you in terms of your alignment. So how can you help both you and them? You can help them by another Annie E. Casey Foundation example. If you were really convinced that's who you wanted to get a connection with because they only fund by invitation, you might choose to see what's out there and retweet their Kids Count data book and the different reports that come out. Maybe you post it as a link within your newsletter. Hey, did you see the latest data related to our particular community or to our state as a whole? And here's what we're doing with it. So you're putting yourself in their sphere. Is it going to always work? No. Is it something in service of stewardship, building relationships, trying to build connections? Absolutely. One of my favorite types of organizations that are doing usually lots of things that give community members opportunities to help showcase work, community foundations, and United Ways. If there's any sort of funding that you want from either of those groups, they usually have many other things happening during the course of the year that you can help promote or support. United Way, it's their annual giving campaigns, if that feels appropriate for your organization. For community foundations, they usually have multiple different funding programs, different deadlines, different ways that they're engaged in the community. I'm generalizing, that's not true in all communities, but they're two pretty common examples where there's a lot that you can help promote that does put you in their field of vision in terms of the work that you're doing, and oh yeah, they are a great part of our community. And so it starts to build some of that positive stewardship feeling. This particular example, I love it. The Impact 100 programs, grant making groups that then after some competition and they go down to finalists, makes one big award. This type of grant making exists in multiple large communities. It's not about the odds that you'd make it through and is it the best use of everybody's time. I'm going to set all that to the side. Different groups make different choices about applying for it or not. Really good way to get community members so involved in the idea of grant making. The thing that I love about this example is that the post was made not, I mean, I'm sure the group who won did post about it, but this picture was not posted by the folks that won. It was posted by the folks who were finalists that did not win. Talk about good sportsmanship. Whew, that's cool. That's something that community members and funders remember. Oh, they worked really hard to make it through our process. And it won't guarantee anything in the future, but wow, that was really classy. That was awesome. Builds goodwill. Number 9, ask each grant maker what is allowable and or of interest with regards to their participation in your events. Make them feel welcome within your organization. What that means is that if you're having those site visits, the open houses, galas, performances, where and how could you or would you invite your grant maker? You don't have to invite them for free if it's a paid event, but you could. But you should ask them before you do something for free, because you don't want them to say, oh, thanks, but I can't accept the ticket. And then it gets awkward if you're like, oh, but I'll let you pay for it. So ask up front, you know, I'd really like to invite you to this event. I'm not sure if you're allowed to, accept comped tickets, or if I gave you a discounted ticket, if you're allowed to pay for that instead. But it's a great way for them to see your organization in action. If it's performances, yeah, that is, right? They're there, they're watching the youth theater program, they're watching the adult chorus group, whatever it might be. I turned it into a music thing, not sure why, but whatever it is that you're putting forward, they're at the STEM competition. Now I went for Lego robotics in my mind. But even a special event, a fundraising special event, is a great place for them to learn more about your organization, because usually those events are full of storytelling elements, showcasing your impact. Now this last one, I told you these are not in order in which you must consider them or implement them. And you might say, Diane, number 10 is a given. Oh, but not always. Even with well-intentioned organizations, sometimes this slips. And I highlight it as one of the tips for improving relationships, because having not just you, the grant professional, but having everyone in the organization understand why the deadlines are important, not just for the application itself, but more so for reports. The don't miss the deadline idea, folks get that related to the application. The portal's closed. They won't accept another FedEx package, right? Deadline is deadline. That is usually pretty well understood and accepted. But once the funding is received and the award contract has been signed or the letter of acknowledgement sent, even great organizations might, whoops, we're going to turn that in on Monday when it was due on Friday. Whoops, it's supposed to go in by the 1st of the month, but the 1st of the month is a Saturday, so I'm going to turn it in on Monday. Nope, wrong. You should have turned it in on Friday. Never turn it in after the deadline. Always turn it in at least on the deadline, if not the day or 2 or 4 before. The deadline is the last day that the funder is willing to accept whatever it is for then their process of how they review and like take the next step, maybe cut your grant check. When you turn it in late, when you miss that deadline, oh, you are inconveniencing them and adding stress to their system, and that does not help improve relationships. So number 10, yes, it is about deadlines as well. It is really about all of the requirements that come after the award. You might even want to track the number of days on average that you submit reports in advance of the deadline. Make it a metric that you put in front of the whole team. I'd like to have this be an average of 3 days in advance of the deadline for this year. I think we can do it. If we do it, let's have a pizza party. True story. I know organizations that do things like that. Make it a metric, make it something people can see, and all of a sudden, well, what we measure is what we decide is important. And that'll pull our deadlines forward, and we will not miss a deadline, which will mean we will have great funder relationships. Now, I could talk grants all day, but we can't because you have other probably grant-related things that you need to do. And so I'm wondering if anyone has questions about these tips. You could start to type them into the chat box. You're welcome to unmute. If you have a particular tactic or a specific number tip that stood out for you as the thing you want to try in the upcoming month, I would love to hear that if you're willing to share. Maybe it was something about promoting funder work on social media. Maybe it was about asking about their preferences or policies around attending galas or performances. Maybe it was about the board buddy idea and using LinkedIn to find connections. I don't know. I'm guessing. So if you're willing to tell me what the one thing is you want to try after today, I would love to hear that in the chat box. Or again, if you want to unmute. I want to make sure you know how to find me after today. I'm always happy to answer your questions, so you can drop me an email. It's on the screen, diane@dh100consulting.com. I'm also going to type it into the chat box for you. You're welcome to drop an email with a question anytime you want. You also could drop me a direct message on LinkedIn. I get it. It's different than like an inbox message, so sometimes it feels a little easier. You're welcome to do that. But happy to chat more about relationships or quite frankly, anything grant related after today. All right, I'm going to keep an eye on the chat box, but I think, Brooke, I'm going to send it back your way.
Okay. Thank you so much for your presentation, Diane. Incredible as always, extremely informative. Friendly reminder, folks, that there is a link to download a PDF of today's slides, both in the shared notes section earlier in the chat, and I'm also putting it into the chat once again right now. And just above that is a link to today's webinar feedback survey. If y'all don't mind just taking a minute or two to complete that for us. They're anonymous, so you can be as candid as you would like, and it helps us at the Native Learning Center to know, what's working with the webinars, what we can improve upon. And we do share the feedback with our instructors as well. We hope you can join us for our next webinar. That is going to be once again with Diane. This will be on the 13th next week, so you can learn with us right before Valentine's Day. That'll be nice. If you need to access the recording of this, as well as any of our other recorded webinars, you can now check them out on our YouTube channel. There's a Cathedra webinar archive playlist where you can go through all of our webinars from the past, I want to say like 2 years. Please check out our upcoming events. We post them to our various social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. If you enjoy podcasts, we have an in-house produced podcast, the Hope of Thinking Native American podcast. You can listen to that wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you are somebody who prefers to watch the video recordings where you can see us talking to our guests, we post that to our YouTube channel as well. But thanks everybody for joining in today. Again, we hope you can take a minute to complete that webinar feedback survey, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of the day. Doesn't look like anybody is typing, Diane. So I'm going to go ahead and close out. But I hope everybody has a fantastic rest of their day. And we look forward to connecting with you again really soon. All right, everybody, take care.